Hello, everyone. Hello again. My name is Steve Erlanger. I'm the European diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times. And I have, again, another pleasure to have a wonderful panel here. It's a very complicated issue. It's the debate over wealth redistribution, which I think is particularly sensitive these days when it's so clear that income inequality is actually growing, and it's one of the tests I think democracies face. So with us, we're very lucky on air somewhere, I hope. We have Joe Stiglitz, who is at Columbia and one of the world's distinguished economists. And with me in the studio is one of the world's prime ministers, Eduard Heger, Prime Minister of Slovakia, who's been in office 6 months, so hasn't been yet beaten down by the ordinary work of day-to-day politics. So, Prime Minister, if we can start with you, I remember the old Czechoslovakia, I remember the Velvet Divorce, and I remember a country, your country, which is kind of pretty much mono-ethnic, pretty mono-religious, pretty protected by the old Soviet bloc. I mean, immigration was never an issue in the Soviet bloc. Emigration, yes. Immigration, no. So when you look at the question of income distribution, does it remind you of communism, or do you think it now has some new, more important meaning?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. And follow up on your question, I remember the times very well as well. And I think I will just share an example, and there is much more examples that I can share over the discussion, but this is a recent example out of the COVID. As you know, during the COVID, there was problem with social contact, and many jobs had to stop because we had lockdown in Slovakia. And we as a government provided support to the people who couldn't do their jobs. And what we did, we said, we're going to reimburse you 60%, up to 60% of your pay, while you're going to be at home. And we did this also to self-employed people. And we have automotive industry in Slovakia. It's very strong, and we have a lot of people also self-employed who are part of this automotive and construction business, etc. But what we faced, and we were called and asked by the great companies, please stop providing this support anymore, because as the economy was getting back, the self-employed people, they didn't want to come to the job because they said, I don't have a full support, but I do have support, and I rather stay at home getting less money instead of getting a full pay and going back to work. And this was a very recent experience which shows immediately from the short term that I think we are not at the level where we can give people pay and expect that they will just work anyway.
I mean, just to follow up for a second, one of the interesting things I remember about Slovakia is you produce more cars per capita than any country on earth.
Yes, that's true. We are
which is quite amazing.
The biggest producer per capita.
And a lot of it is kind of EU companies, a lot of German ones. Under lockdown, what happened? Did German Kurzarbeit kick in, or was this under local laws, or?
We had to establish a temporary Kurzarbeit, as you mentioned, because this proved during this crisis to be the best measure. And over the time, we prepared the legislation where we now have also a permanent Kurzarbeit. Yeah, but this was a very important instrument, and it helped temporarily for providing. But as I said, it needed to be regulated, because if we kept it a little longer, and we had problem to have the people back on the market. So we had to reduce it as the economy was needing the people. We had to reduce it, otherwise they didn't appear on the jobs.
Right. I see we have Joe Stiglitz with us. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this. This topic of redistribution of wealth, it's right into your wheelhouse. So let me ask you, is it getting anywhere, or is it actually getting worse?
Well, the COVID-19 both exposed and exacerbated the inequalities within our society, or would have done so had it not been for the strong government actions that many countries all over the world undertook. The interesting thing is what has happened, for instance, in the United States under President Biden, in response to COVID-19, we undertook measures to resuscitate the economy, but resuscitate in a way that would increase equality. So in 1 year, it is anticipated that we will reduce childhood poverty by 50%. That's remarkable in 1 year. And what that has shown is that inequality is a matter of choice. We have policies that could eliminate it. Now, it doesn't speak to the issue of labor supply that the Prime Minister referred to. These are children, and so they're not in the labor force. They are affecting the potential productivity in the future. If children grow up in poverty, they're not going to be, without adequate education, nutrition, healthcare, they're not going to be as productive member of the labor force. And so that's why there was a lot of attention paid to childhood poverty. On the issue that the Prime Minister raised about the extent to which providing money has affected the labor supply, that's a issue of a lot of debate right now in the United States and many other countries. In a way, it's an interesting example of a controlled experiment, because in the United States, different states across the country have different unemployment insurance programs, have started, discontinued the benefits. So we've gotten a controlled experiment of a almost unique example. And overwhelmingly, the evidence is that those unemployment benefits do not affect significantly the labor supply.
That's it. That's
now.
Yes. Go ahead. Sorry. No, because I mean, I'm sorry. We have a delay. Joe, go ahead. I apologize. Your turn.
I just want to say is, I think we're going to find obviously in the midst of the pandemic, it's a very unusual situation. Women are not able to participate in the labor market as actively because their children are being sent home. One day they're at school, and the next day they may be at home, quarantined. People are afraid to go to work because they don't want to die or they don't want to get the disease until we have enough people vaccinated. It's a traumatic, we have to admit, it's a traumatic experiment we're going through.
That's right.
I believe that when we get enough of our population vaccinated, when the incidence of the disease comes down, then people will want to go back to work. Work is an important part of their life.
Good, thanks. I mean, because one of the things you mentioned, I want to ask Prime Minister Heger, in a way, this has been a great experiment at state redistribution of funds, right? It's not a very liberal notion, but COVID, in a way, seemed to make it necessary. Do you think it breaks a taboo? Do you think it sets any sort of precedent for the future?
Well, I would like to also follow up on what was mentioned by Mr. Stiglitz, because Slovakia is an interesting country to observe and see actually practical experience with scenarios that you described. And first of all, I think the government, it's important that the government is is watching for the harmed, marginalized groups of people in their country. It must have instruments to help them to come back into life. But this is rather a very difficult task. But on behalf of the children, I would like to address, because this is something we are facing in Slovakia as well. And it's very true that you need to address, if you want to put the poverty down, you need to work with the children at very early age. And we in Slovakia have these marginalized communities. Mostly these are Roma's communities. And what we introduced as a government, we put it also in our recovery plan, that we need to put these kids into kindergartens starting from the age of 3, because when they arrive to school at this time, without having this kindergarten experience, they come to school, but they see for the first time in the school the pencil. They don't have the motorics, they don't have the skills, and immediately they fall off from the regular education system. They need to go to special schools, which it's not their case, because these kids are healthy, they're wise, they're just not trained enough.
I mean, did COVID make this worse because they couldn't go to school?
Well, the COVID was difficult for schools in general, for every children, and yes, this is a delay that we'll have to work with, but not only among the marginalized groups. But what I'm trying to say is that if we want to beat the poverty, we need to agree. We need to start with the children at the very early age, but the solution is the education.
Sure.
Is allow them to have a quality education, so once they come to school, they can achieve. And we have experience where we did it, some pilot programs we did, those children do very well. And that's the important thing.
It is important. I mean, I must say, without being impolite, I mean, I've heard the same thing my whole life, that education matters, and then somehow states don't do education very, very well. So I do wish you good luck with this, and particularly with the Roma, who have long been a very a group that has faced quite a lot of racism, that had jobs under communism, because everyone had to work, and as soon as communism ended, lost their jobs.
And this is, I'm glad you mentioned that, if I may. We have the strong experience with communism, but communism was a regime where there was uniformity. There was a regime that was so regulated that everybody had to have a job, but there was overcapacity and you couldn't have a job that you wanted. It's the job that you had to have, and everybody had to be kind of equal in a way that you couldn't show your personality, your individuality, etc. And we are still having the harms of this system 30 years after communism. We see that the mentality of the nation was so hit that it causes us still problems in several areas.
That's fair, and it will take a while, there's no question. It's like Moses sending the Jews out into the desert to lose the habits of slavery, right?
Exactly.
Joe, I wanted to come back to you with really the same question, because in America, certainly, the idea of state aid is an ideological issue, right? I mean, Republicans generally think it's a terrible thing, even though they're quite happy to have some of it. Democrats seem to think it's the answer to everything. Do you think this payments on COVID, do you think this breaks a taboo at all? Or does it not change the debate about wealth redistribution and how we help those who have less?
Well, I think this crisis, like the 2008 crisis, has changed the nature of the debate. What we saw is that the government can spend money and make a difference. If we hadn't had the government intervening, it would have been a disaster everywhere in the world. So people really understood the role of government. Individuals could not have protected themselves. So we needed collective action, and everybody sort of understands that. We also understood that, to some extent, that the budget constraints that had tied our hands were a little bit of a shibboleth. We could spend more money at this moment of emergency. Now, what it has done is, it doesn't mean we destroyed budget constraints. The economics is about living within limited resources. So you have to recognize the importance of constraints, of limited amounts of resources, but we shouldn't get mired down in arbitrary rules.
Right.
In Europe, you have this arbitrary rule of 3% deficits, 60% debt, 2% inflation. Those came out of nowhere. They're just brought out of the thin air. There's no economic justification for them.
Yeah.
If
Well,
you're spending money on investments, it makes your economy stronger.
that's right.
If you're investing in green, you're protecting yourself against a calamity. So to me, it helps change our perspective.
Well, I mean, one of the big debates to come in Europe is the debate about the flexibility of these Maastricht rules when you combine COVID spending and climate spending. The idea of having a fiscal deficit of only 3% of GDP seems like a fantasy. I mean, it seems like a fantasy now. But in a way, I also want to ask you both, building up this much debt and inflation's coming back a bit, so interest rates are going to come up a bit. In the end, are you worried this will actually penalize the people who pay the most taxes, which are not the rich, and inflation, which of course penalizes the poor and also middle class? Is that a concern, or am I wrong? I'd like to be wrong.
Well, from my point of view, the inflation right now is a hiccup. Normally, you don't shut down the economy and then try to start it up again. This is a most unusual time, and economies don't go through these dramatic transitions very easily. When you go to war, when you come away out of war, these are major transformations, and the market doesn't handle these well. So I am not surprised that we have some shortages. There will be spikes in the prices of some goods. There'll be some inflation. Whether that builds into inflationary momentum, I'm skeptical. But if it does, we have a lot of instruments. It is not a healthy thing for interest rates to be as low as they've been. And zero is not a good world to be in. And we've been in the zero interest rate world for 12 years. Right. So moving to a more normal world of 3-4% interest rates, I think would be a good thing.
Okay.
It's not going to be an easy transition, but I think we may be moving to you might say, a much better place for the economy.
Good.
We will have to, in this process, protect those in the middle, those at the bottom, who might otherwise be affected. But many of our programs already are designed to have that kind of protection.
Right, thank you. Good.
Our social programs are indexed to inflation.
Right.
And so they are protected. Wages typically rise with inflation, so they are also protected. So we have to make sure that we have protections in place.
Great. Mr. Prime Minister, we're sort of running out of time, but I want to ask you more specifically about the Maastricht rules. Mm-hmm. I mean, there tends to be this notion that Southern Europe wants them relaxed, the frugal four doesn't want them relaxed, and Germany, we don't know yet. So what do you think?
Yes. Well, I think we have to go to the core of the debate. And I think I also agree, and I've been saying that for several years, we need to reform those rules, and we need to look for the long-term sustainability, healthy public finances. We always have to aim for that. So that's why we need to change the measuring of it. And but I would like to go back now, if you don't mind, to the state aid in one comment. The state aid for groups that are harmed is needed for temporary time, not permanent. Temporary to help them get back, and then cut it off. And also with the redistribution, income redistribution, I think we need to educate people into generosity. This is the principle that it needs to be on, because I heard that the universal basic income relieves people from this existential fear. Well, I think fear is something we will never get rid of. We need to teach the people how to overcome the fear, not to get rid of the fear, because that's not going to happen.
Right.
And when we look at the taxes, I think we need to also educate the people that taxes are just an instrument. It's a fee for the services, and therefore the investment of the government and any spending must go with the value for money, because then you get the most effectivity, and then the people see that the taxes are being well used for the product that they're getting from the government, which is the quality service.
Fair enough. I've been asked to kind of push this session along and have a question from Harish Natarajan, who runs Polemics. So, Harish,
yes,
please go ahead.
So
Your question, please.
So thank you to both of you for your speeches. And I guess maybe coming from the tech space, there's maybe a slightly longer term question, given the issues of income redistribution or wealth redistribution or any other form of inequality. And that is, we do seem at the precipice, whether that's 10, 20, 30 years from now, of a fairly large structural shift in the economy. And in particular, with artificial intelligence, with different kinds of cryptography, aren't we looking at a world where labor demand is, even if not reduced, definitely very different than before? And to me, I just wonder, what kind of challenges do you think that means for redistribution? What kind of policies then become adequate? Because that seems to be a very different world than the one we're in right now.
Can you try to answer that?
I will go very quickly.
Relatively
This is something
briefly.
that we face in Slovakia. We are an automation industry economy, and there's a big fear that we could lose a lot of jobs, etc. But we see that innovation and education must go hand in hand with the industry, because now we see a big gap. Our education is not able to provide people for the market, so we have to spend a lot of money on requalification. People have lower salaries, etc. So we want to spend more money on education so the people can have new occupation. And there will be always new occupation. We already see we have jobs that we never thought that we will have, that they will exist now on the internet, etc. So I think it's just keeping hand in hand with the market and teaching the people new skills for the jobs, so they can realize themselves. And then with the higher added value, I think that's important, because there is more income. Then we don't speak about poverty. So I really see that the number one tool is the education that is always on track with the market.
Okay. Professor Stiglitz, can you try to answer in like 2 minutes?
Yeah, so let me look at it from a very global perspective. Over the next 30 years, we are going to have to make a lot of investments to make the green transition. And people say we can't afford it. The fact that we have a savings glut, a zero interest rate, and the fact that we are likely to have more labor available will mean that we will be able to make the green transition. And that will be one of the sources of employment. There is a difficult process. We're going to be moving from a manufacturing economy to a service sector economy. So Slovakia is going to be facing some challenges as that happens. The number of manufacturing jobs globally is going to go down. Some places will be able to respond, but globally there's going to be a big reduction. But we need an enormous number of jobs for caring for the aged, educating our children, healthcare. So that's going to need a major transformation. In the past, many of those service sector jobs were paid very low because of discrimination, because they were disproportionately women. And we've had gender discrimination as part of our economic system. If we eliminate that discrimination, those will become higher paid jobs and better respected jobs.
That's a wonderful optimistic note on which to end. So I just want to thank you both very, very much. And a round of applause, please.
Thank you.